Welcome to the Michigan Golfer Show. Join us each week as we explore the people, the places, and the events that shape our great game.
Well, one of the other things we notice when we're here is there have been giant advances in technology over recent years, and you have some of it here. What are some of the things that have made people better golfers that are technical?
Well, I would have spent quite a lot of time teaching without technology. In my years in Cadillac, I think of what we did. Actually, I still kind of teach in an old-fashioned way, but I do like having some of the modern tools. One of the ones that you hear about is TrackMan. We use TrackMan, or we have 4 studios here, and we have 2 TrackMan, so we share it. And where it tells a story in this data, in angles, and tells you degrees of right and left. And I don't really need a TrackMan to tell me that a ball flew high or that it sliced or hooked. I can see that. But to know the relationships, to know path, face, coordination, mostly when a person hits a ball to the left, they will swing further to the right. When actually many times when it goes to the left, they're already swinging to the right. It's just that their club face isn't on the same line. And TrackMan helps to show them that. So video was a big advance. I can remember before we had this building in the first couple of years, Miles of Golf had these covered shelters that weren't really tied to the building. They kind of had to walk outside to go into the studio. And I can remember having a camera and a television set where I'm drawing lines on the screen of the TV. That was kind of the first for me of using technology where you could actually show them this is what you do. And a person would say, well, I don't do that. And I'd say, well, it looks like your hat in that picture. I think that's you. And they'd say, yeah, but I don't do that. I'd say, maybe we should look again. And then they look and they go, oh, maybe I do that. I didn't think I did that. I didn't mean to do that. Well, it doesn't really matter as much what you meant to do. It's what you did. Right. And then we have to see if it's consistent, and you know that, and you'd say, well, I'm a little more this way than I meant to be. Well, then you could adjust it.
Well, that's cool because it takes the pressure off of you.
One of our teachers has what they're called force plates, and that's something that he uses very effectively. We have a thing called body track that helps a person understand their footwork and where their weight is and how their balance flows from one side to another. And that feedback is really important when that person has that specific problem. I don't think, a lot of times people feel like technology is going to make them a better player or make us a better teacher. I think the teacher still is kind of integral in that they have to know how to use the technology effectively. And that's kind of an important part of it. So it isn't that we have this routine where we put everybody through the same things. What we might look at is we watch a person, I would watch a person loosen up. I would ask that person kind of a little about themselves. One is, hey, what drove you to a lesson? What made you want to do that? They have certain concerns. I shouldn't assume anything. Maybe it could be anything that drove them to it. But most people want good contact. They want to start their ball generally in the direction of the target, and they'd like to control the shape of it. So now it's my job to see what is lacking if they're inconsistent in any of those areas, but not just tell them what to do, but really help them understand so they could do it without me. If I do a good job, they get better at helping themselves because they understand what they're managing. They have to become a manager of their own game. To be that, they have to understand who and what they're managing and be able to recognize it when it's right and recognize it when it's not.
Well, it's interesting about golf in that from beginners to Phil Mickelson, everyone still has a chance to learn something else. And we notice that about the pros.
Oh, you bet. Isn't that the truth? You know, I think that for a player to play well for a long time, you know, their physical ability, their hand-eye coordination doesn't typically get better. You know what I mean is I can't swing the club as fast as I did 20 years ago, or, but it doesn't mean I couldn't get better, because I can understand and be better at that coordinating, understanding how to stay objective, how to be a good problem solver. You know, I always say the best problem solvers are those who enjoy problem solving. You know, if a person hates problem solving, they're going to avoid it at every turn. We have to get so that they embrace problem solving. Why would a person not like that? Well, because they don't tend to solve the problem. So we have to help them with the process of problem solving and to embrace it. And you get rewarded for it. If you can just stay objective, don't panic.
So you have to accept the fact that this is the problem.
Yeah. And sometimes you think you know what the problem is, but when you go to solve it, it doesn't solve it. That means it may not be that. So keep trying. You know, the first try isn't always the one that solves it. But I always say when a person, we see a number of competitive players who want to be good competitive players, but we also see just nice folks who'd like to play a little better. You know, I mean, we see both. And so if a person is competing, I want them to know. Sometimes they tend to say, make a decision early on as to how this is going to turn out. Like, if I make a double bogey on the first hole, this isn't going to be a good day. You know what I'd want them to say? You know, this is going to make a great story. You know how I double bogeyed the first hole and then I had a great round? To think that's possible? But it's going to depend on them and how well they recognize. Anything can happen. People can make mistakes. That doesn't make us a bad player. It's what are you going to do about it?
It goes back to that confidence. You have to have the confidence of leaving the bad shot behind as you address your next one.
Yeah. Believe in yourself and say, I can do better than that. I just have to prove it.
Well, one thing I was thinking about, my dad was a left-handed golfer. He was a good golfer, scratch golfer. And are there differences in the way you approach teaching left-handed versus right-handed golfers?
Okay, so two of my golf buddies, the ones that were my golf buddies the most in my life, my dad was a left-handed golfer, and Henry, left-handed golfer. Now, I always would say, like, you know, Henry was qualified for the Michigan Open when he was about 14, and we would hit out of the same pile, you know, because we're face-to-face. So actually, we can teach more effectively, because typically for a right-hander, I have to turn and be the same way they are.
You can see it from the front.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I can move the way they move, but it's in a mirror, so you have to reverse left and right. You know, like my left is their right, so I have to think to reverse that. But in some ways it's easier because you can stand face to face and you can demonstrate things, and they're looking at it more in the mirror. I usually will ask a player, you know, I have a right-handed player, and I'll say, are you right-handed? And they could say, well, don't you see my clubs? No, sometimes left-handers play right and vice versa. Phil Mickelson's right-handed.
He is?
He's right-handed, yes.
Why does he play left?
He does everything right. And my dad was like that. Does everything right, but he batted left-handed as a kid. And you see that in the big leagues. Right-handed throwers hit left-handed. That's not unusual. Now, Henry is left-handed. You know, now I have a son who throws right and writes left.
Okay.
Now, I had never seen that, but I've heard of that many times since. I knew that. Anyways, I'd like to know when that's the case. Like if they're left-handed but they're right-handed, you don't see that as but I do see left-handers play right quite often. So I like to know that because I want to know their dominant side is their lead arm. Right. Certain things are easier for them. Most are pushing with the right side from behind. So it's good to know that because it's almost, you can say, Oh, good. You've got your lead arm as your dominant side. Oh, this is going to be easy because I have to usually teach right-handers to learn how to use their left arm. And so knowing that which hand's their dominant side does help. So that'll be early on, right when I watch them. Hey, are you left-handed or right-handed?
Do you think that's because left-handed clubs are not quite as available?
I think it used to be like that. Not as much these days. So you do see way more left-handed golfers these days, I think, than you used to. I think that I thought it was very unusual. Like, my dad would have just started golf when he was probably in the 30s, and left-handed equipment wasn't that easy to get. So, a lot of people did switch. And then I worked with some of the some years ago, I worked with some of the hockey players at the University of Michigan, and you have a lot of them were from Canada, and they shoot left-handed, but then because they didn't have left-handed clubs available, they'll play right-handed and hit a real weak shot right-handed. And I watched them play hockey, and they hit a rocket slap shot from the point. I'd say, now why don't you play left-handed? Well, I don't know. I never had any clubs, so I'd say, come on, let's get a left-handed club. Watch, you hit it about 50% further. So, anyways, if you help them with, what are some of the similarities in something they know? Like, do you play tennis or did you ever play ping pong? Understanding how the club face works. If it's something that they're familiar with, like a hockey player learning to hit a hard wrist shot, there's a lot of similarities in how you handle the stick as how you handle a golf club. I'm an old hockey player.
I had never thought about the connection between hockey and golf, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
So I'm also wondering about coaching women. Is it different?
One thing in particular that I noticed is different is, and it was just an observation I made early on when I started teaching, because I worked, one of the things I'll never forget is when I went to Cadillac, the first year I was there, I was the assistant. I'm but very interested in teaching. I always was. I wanted to learn to be a good player because I could be a more effective teacher, I thought. I wanted to be a good player, to be a good teacher, different than most. Most just want to be a real good player. But I had mentors. I had a fellow named Ronald Parle, who was the golf professional at Battle Creek Country Club I went to work for, and Ron always believed that you needed to understand teaching and playing, that not everybody can do that. And so I didn't think at the time I was a great player. I was kind of a late bloomer, but I wanted to be, and he acted like he expected me, and he treated me like I was way better than I thought I was, and so I wanted to live up to what he thought. But so I had a beginning golfers ladies clinic when I went to Cadillac, and I still remember almost everyone that was in my class to this day, and that was 1980. And one thing that I noticed was, and I'd say maybe 30 or 40% of women, because of flexibility, they have more flexibility in their arm typically. They have this problem, their club face gets too close because they can hold a club like this. Now, most men can't because, I'm sorry to sound sexist, but you see how if you can hold something like this and still hang on to it, most men wouldn't have the flexibility. When you put your hand that way, they can't hold it. You know what I mean? Like if you want to take a knife out of a criminal's hand, you bend their hand this way and they have to let go. Okay, now, but what happens is a lot of times, and I found about 1 out of 3 of a beginner would hit a low grounder to the left, and it's mostly because their hand would get this way, and it affects the club face. If I could show you, when a person's hand goes like this, you see how the club face is going to return real closed. Now, it's more typical, I would say 8 out of 10 men, it's natural for them to hold something like this, and the club face will be open. So Men tend to hit, I'd say if I were to generalize, it's unfair to generalize, but I'd say more often you're treating a high weak slice, and it isn't everybody, it certainly isn't, and I think it has to do with the flexibility in the tendons of their arm. Is that I call this the forearm, the hard side, the top side, and this would be the soft side. So it's uncomfortable for a man to hold his hand this way, and I've found most women it isn't uncomfortable.
Wow.
It just has to do with anatomy.
An
it isn't.
advantage. We
It
have an
is,
advantage.
except that if you overdo that,
Yeah.
face is so close that the
Yeah.
ball doesn't go in the air. Where the guy's hitting a high bloop over to the right, he needs to get it more close. She needs to understand how to get it more open. So, not that that's, it just, at first, the way I mention it is, when I first started teaching, I didn't know how to handle that. You're used to seeing slicers, but you're not, it's teaching a person how to control how their hand is and how to hold it more, what we call flat, and then how their grip complements that. How, because if a person gets their hand underneath the club like this, it's very easy to go like this. So anyways, those are little things that once I see that low left, it's not that they're couldn't be a good golfer. It's that one aspect there kind of seek comfort, and they need to kind of understand, when I do this though, I need to get the ball in the air, and it's going to be related to understanding how their club face works and how that position affects it.
Yeah, gotta watch it. And
Yeah.
in relationship to the angle on your wrist.
Yeah, and I'll be able to pick that up quickly because I've seen it before. Now, the first few times, I got no idea what to do about that. Wow. So she would tend to aim way over to the right and hit a grounder to the left, and I feel bad about myself that I can't help more. But then once I started understanding, because it mattered, it kind of matters. I think to be an effective teacher, it matters. Everyone, you can't just say, well, they didn't listen to me, and, I told them all the right stuff, but they didn't. No, it's my job to make sure that they understand and can do it. I mean, you just have to. It just means it matters. Everyone.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't know. I can't see how I can't see how a golfer gets overconfident, because it's not, we get beat up a lot. And I can't see how a teacher could be overconfident, because if somebody says, I have one of my students, he says, it's all you, coach, when he hits a good one, I'd say that isn't going to go to my head, because then I got to take credit for all the ones that you don't. Because if I get credit for the good ones, I got to take credit for the bad ones. So I'm not going to get overconfident because you hit a good one. You know what I mean? So I always thought that a person is really good because they were really good. They understood it. And if they did bad, it's because they should have had a better coach. And I'm talking about myself. I should have done a better job. That I don't want them to have any of that heartache. I don't want them to have any of that. I should have done a better job. They should have handled that situation better.